I'm Kathy Shasberg. I'm the president of the college. It's my pleasure to welcome you here tonight. Those of you who are regular Lowell lecture groupies may be surprised to find that we're here. Well, our theater gets heavy use, and the theater was not available tonight. That's why we're here. We're working on getting more chairs, and we're just delighted to see so many people here. I want to first thank the very many people who helped bring this lecture about. Starting with Finn a little bit closer, okay. Finn Parkour sitting right here. This lecture was his brainchild. He is a person who has worked on Interfaith Dialog much of his life. And he and his wife retired here to the Cape, and he's bringing it here to the Cape with us as well. And we have, among the sponsors, aside from the college, the Cape Cod Interfaith Coalition, the Cape Cod Council of Churches, and the Yarmouth Rotary Club. And with those people who are from those groups here in the audience, you just wave your hands and give them a round of applause. I also want to publicly thank the Lowell Foundation, who gives us a grant every year to sponsor our Distinguished Speaker Series. Generally, we have one in the fall and one in the spring, but my assistant, Linda Houle, is parsimonious, to say the least, and she's very careful with the money, so we're able to squeak out a third lecture this year, and we're very thankful to Linda for that, and thankful to Michael Gross and Linda, who did much of the logistics and the arrangements. I have a couple of housekeeping items to let you know. The way we're going to do the Q&A tonight is a little different than we have for most of the Lowell lectures. We have cards to hand out, and we'll ask that you, if you have a question to ask, that you write it on the card, and then we'll pass the cards up to Dr. Chaudry when he's ready to begin the question period. Now, you may be surprised to see that these little cards say, "From the Office of the President." We devised this plan over supper, and I couldn't find index cards in my office, but I'm half Irish, and so there are these note cards that are really too small for my level of verbosity. And when I write thank you notes and condolence notes and congratulatory notes, they're really too small. So they've sat on the shelf ever since I got here, and that's what we're going to use tonight. We'll pass them out, and you can write your questions on them. We also have a request from the Cape Cod Times. If there are members of the audience, is the reporter here, back there in the green shirt? Oh no, I thought you were waving. I don't think he's here yet, but he will be here shortly. A reporter from the Cape Cod Times is interested in doing a story on what it is like for the Muslim community on the Cape, and how they experience their life here. And if there are any among you who are willing to speak to the reporter, he asks that you simply raise your hand or find him at the end of the lecture and speak to him, and we hope you will. Finally, I want to mention that another nice aspect of this that the Lowell Foundation helps us pay for is a very nice reception, which will be downstairs in the cafeteria immediately following the lecture. And that will give you a chance to talk with each other and talk with Dr. Chaudry and all of these wonderful people from the sponsoring organizations a little bit longer. So finally, my most pleasant duty tonight is to introduce Dr. Chaudry. Now, there is a biography in the program, and I don't want to repeat everything it says there, but I will tell you that over dinner I learned that he was born in a small village in Pakistan. He was the first of his family to go to high school, let alone college. So we think he has a lot in common with our community college students. He went to college first in Lahore, Pakistan, then to the London School of Economics, where he graduated with honors in economics and econometrics. And then he found himself in New England and took his PhD at Tufts University. He has, particularly since 9/11, had quite a passion about trying to educate people about Islam, which, as I'm sure many people in the audience know, there are many misconceptions, and Americans know little about Islam. and particularly to try to distinguish those extremists. Particularly to try to understand that there's a very small minority of extremists, but mainstream Islam is something that we should all be comfortable with, and we should learn our neighbors, and that's what this lecture is all about. I am very pleased to introduce Dr. Ali Chaudry.
Please pose here. You put it up. Put it up here. Okay. So you pop it. It's not no part in here. It's no hot. Yeah. Okay. Let's turn this on. That one needs to be on too. Is on? Okay. Assalamu alaikum. That is the Islamic greeting, which means peace be upon you. And the response to that, as it came from some of the members of this audience, is wa alaikum assalam, which means and peace be upon you. I am delighted and thankful for the opportunity to be here with you. And I must say that I'm actually touched by the turnout, which I had not expected, but I welcome it. I hope that we will have not a lecture, but a conversation. I'm going to try to share with you, as a Muslim, what I know about my faith, what it means to me as an American, and hopefully help you understand from a much broader perspective Muslims in general. And most importantly, I would say that we would have accomplished our goal tonight if you leave here tonight with a better understanding and the ability to differentiate between the true faith of Islam and what it teaches and what you hear in the media. Unfortunately, extremism has become the face of Islam in the media. And as moderate Muslims, which is the overwhelming majority of Muslims around the world, feel this as an obligation, that it is our duty to take our faith back. And that's why I really appreciate this opportunity to have this conversation with you today. I would like to thank, before I begin, thank my friend, Dr. Finbar Kaur, who suggested the idea, and I certainly also especially thank President Schatzberg for inviting a Muslim to speak, because I can tell you that there are institutions around this country which would not invite Muslims to come and speak. I know of places where Muslim speakers have been disinvited. So I think it's a great, really a tribute to you as a community for the openness and the willingness to listen and understand. Because it is only with understanding and a mutual respect that we can develop for each other that we can be good Americans and good citizens, good human beings, and do what God really wants us to do in this world, how we use our life. So I want to thank the audience in particular. I hope that you will write down your questions and send them up. But that is not to say that you can't stand up and ask a question. That will be fine too. But the idea was that given what the variety of questions are, then I can consolidate them and hopefully provide an answer. We can use our time more efficiently. But in any case, if there's a follow-up you want to ask, something that I've said that you want me to explain, please feel free to raise your hand, and and we'll try to do that. We all know how deeply America and indeed the whole world changed after 9/11. But we also found out that the condemnations by Muslims in America as well as all over the world, especially coming from one of the premier institutes of Islam, Al-Azhar University in Cairo, all of those condemnations that were issued did not get the publicity, did not get the wide distribution. So people still thought that no one is condemning this act. And therefore, people concluded incorrectly, well, then this must be what Islam teaches, because these are Muslims who perpetrated that horrendous terrorist attack on America, my homeland, my adopted country. I'm now here for nearly 39 years. Have raised my family, have 3 children, and 3 grandchildren. So one of the things I want to do today is to help you, at least, understand how Muslims feel about the extremist acts of the terrorists, and hopefully have you share with me any concerns and thoughts that you might still have, because I have gone to many audiences, book clubs, churches, synagogues, colleges, universities to speak, and people would still come up and say, how come we don't hear any condemnations? So our challenge has been how to get the word out, to get it out as widely as possible, get it out to as many people as would listen. And as a result, what has happened is that how many of you have seen the Pew Trust surveys that show that over the last several months, the number of Americans who feel or think of Islam as advocating violence, or Muslims being more prone to violence than other members of other faiths, has increased. So we have not done a good job ourselves of getting the word out. So we are looking for opportunities to do that, and this is one of them, and I appreciate that. One of the concerns that many of you may have noticed, and I heard that at dinner tonight, that after 9/11, Muslim children were afraid to go to school. I know in my own community, our Islamic Center is based near Morristown, New Jersey, where Dr. Finbar Kaur used to be the president of Rotary. That when people heard about women not being able to go to work, Muslim women, members of the Unitarian Fellowship in Morristown called and said, we would be willing to go with you, accompany you, so that you wouldn't be attacked. So the backlash that you hear about was real. Many people felt it. Children especially. I heard from a teacher tonight at the dinner who had Muslim students in his class, and realized that he needed to better understand how to help the children cope with those situations. So I think in your own lives, you have probably come across Muslims, people of other faiths, and have seen situations where you can help. And that was certainly much appreciated. People understood the agony that they were facing, and they appreciated the help that we were getting. But we still have a major challenge in terms of getting people to broadly understand and at least begin to say that yes, those criminals committed that terrorist act, but that's what they were. They were criminal individuals, not the whole community. So to paint the whole community with the same brush and then taunt students that you terrorists, get out of my school. I've heard those comments coming from children. It was very hurtful. So what we need to do is understand that Islam is a religion of peace. And I'm hoping to share with you some of the basic concepts and beliefs, and also try to address some of the current questions that are on people's minds. And if I don't cover them, please raise the question and I will try to address them. Before we go there, I'd like to do a little quiz. Since this is a college, and if you'll permit me, we'll do a little quiz. I have 8 quotations taken from the scriptures. And I'll just use 4 of them so we can save the time. And I just ask you to think about the quotation and see whether it comes from the Torah, the Bible, or the Quran. Okay? So I'm going to read the quotation. I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if you think it's from the Torah. And then I'll ask a second time if you think it's from the Bible. And thirdly, if it's from the Quran. Okay? Does that make sense? Yes. Okay, good. I'm a professor too, so I understand a little bit.
You're not giving grades, I hope.
No grades, no grades. The first one. Oh, Adam, dwell in the garden with your wife and eat freely of its fruits, whatever you desire. But do not come near this tree, or you will become wrongdoers. How many people think it came from the Torah? Okay, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 hands, okay? How many people think it came from the Bible? Okay, a lot of people. How many people think it came from the Quran? Okay, about an equal number. The answer is, it is directly from the Quran. The second one. O children of Israel, remember the favors I bestowed on you. So keep your pledge to me, and I will keep mine to you, and be heedful of me. Does it come from the Torah? 2, okay. 3, 4, 5, okay. Bible? 2, 3, 4. Okay. The Quran? This is very interesting. This is also from the Quran. And in fact, your challenge is going to be, that's the only assignment I would give, is go and Google these phrases. I'll leave some copies, and you'll find out exactly where they come from and the context that they're in. The next one is, the angel said, O Mary, God brings you glad tidings of good news from him, whose name is Messiah, Jesus, Son of Mary, illustrious in this world and the next, and one of those brought near unto God. How many think it came from the Torah? Okay, how about one person? Okay. All right, how many think it came from the Bible? Quite a few hands. How many think it's in the Quran? About the equal number. This is also from the Quran. The final one, very short one, Jesus said, surely God is my Lord and your Lord, so worship him. This is the straight path. Torah? 1, okay. Bible? The Quran? Okay, now you learn. It is also from the Quran. Okay? Well, I'll leave this. I think this sort of helps us understand partly, and I think you'll see the 8 quotations that I'm going to leave with you. Take a look at them to see how many important parts of our faith are integral to the 3 monotheistic religions. In the scriptures, in the traditions, and how we relate to God. And unfortunately, in the post 9/11 world, we completely ignore that. So what I would like to do is, without getting into a lot of detail, I'd like to recommend a short book that Bill Baker, who's a Christian minister, actually he does a lot of other work, who wrote many years ago, More in Common Than You Think. And he talks about commonality between Christianity and Islam. Using the scriptures, specifically citations, giving citations of all of the references that are important. And you'll find in this book that the Quran has more references to Mary than the Bible does. There are more than 60 references to Jesus in the Quran that many people may not realize. And in fact, there's a whole chapter entitled Mary in the Quran, as a standalone chapter that talks about the virgin birth of Christ, his being a Messiah, his being lifted to the heavens, and returning as a Messiah. So I am going to encourage you to please take a look at this and perhaps go further. Now, what I'd like to do now is to talk about 2 sets of issues. First, I'd like to give you an overview of Islam as a faith. I hadn't planned to spend a lot of time on it, but given the level of interest that I was advised, I think I will do that briefly and still leave time for the discussion that we want to have. So the first thing I'd like to do is, what is the meaning of Islam? Islam comes from the root word salam or shalom, which means peace. This is the only religion whose name itself means peace, literally. Islam also means submission to the will of God. So someone who submits to the will of God is a Muslim. Arabic word for that, someone who submits to Islam, accepting the will of God as the guide for their life, becomes a Muslim. And what is the basic structure? There are 2 different areas that I would like to mention. One is the ritualistic part of our faith. To be a Muslim, there are 5 things, or known as the pillars of Islam, that you need to observe, declare, and then follow. And the second part is going to be the spiritual content. What is the spiritual essence of Islam? So I'm going to talk about those 2 separately. So let me first mention the pillar. How many of you are aware of the 5 pillars of Islam? Okay, that's good. That's good. First pillar is the declaration of faith. It's known as Shahada, which in Arabic goes like this. La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. A very simple statement that means there is no God but one God, the Creator, whose Arabic name is Allah, and that Muhammad is his messenger. I would just like to say 3 things about that particular declaration. First, it's a declaration that the individual makes directly to God. It's a commitment you make to God, saying you recognize the unity of God. There's only one God, one Creator. And I believe and I have discussed this with many audiences, that we believe that there is only one creator, and it is the same God that Christians, Jews, and anyone who believes in a creator being unit, one God, or monotheistic, is the same God that Muslims worship. Except that in Arabic, even the Christians refer to God as Allah, because that is the word that was used for the creator. Okay? Second, that when we say that Muhammad is his messenger, that recognizes Muhammad as the last messenger, according to our faith, but it does not negate the presence of many, many thousands of messengers that God sent during time. And especially, for me to be a Muslim, I must recognize prophets, Jesus, Moses, Abraham, and many, many others. There are like 124,000 prophets mentioned in the Quran that God sent at different times to different communities. So I must believe in their prophethood as their messengers, their being messengers of God, and having brought the message to their communities for me to be a Muslim. Therefore, when I refer to Muhammad and say peace be upon him, I will do the same thing when I refer to Isa. And the expression is Isa alayhi salam. That means Isa is the Arabic word. Jesus, peace be upon him. Musa alayhi salam, Moses, peace be upon him. Or Ibrahim, or Abraham, and so forth. So it's very, very important to recognize that we acknowledge the role that different prophets have played in establishing God's will on earth. The next point about this declaration is that, as I said, there is no intermediary. Your commitment is only to God, and only God can judge what your faith is. Nobody else knows what's in your heart. Only God knows. So when it comes to people saying, well, you are not a Muslim, you are a kafir, or you are an infidel, we have no right to make those judgments, because we don't know what is in people's hearts. Only God can. Okay? The second pillar of Islam is prayer. Praying 5 times a day. Now, I won't go into detail, but I would like to use the opening chapter of the Holy Quran, which is the essential part of every unit of prayer that Muslims offer. And I want to share that with you in Arabic, and then I'll read the translation. And I would like you to listen to the translation and recall the Lord's Prayer and see what commonalities you hear. Okay? So let me, if I may, just read it in Arabic. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Malik Yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdina as-siratal mustaqim. Siratal lazina an'amta alayhim. Ghayril maghdubi alayhim. Waladdallin. Ameen. Praise be to Allah, Lord of the worlds, the most gracious, most merciful, Master of the day of judgment. You alone we worship. You alone we turn to for help. Guide us on the straight path, the path of those on whom you have bestowed your grace, not those who have incurred your anger or have gone astray. This prayer is decided during every single unit of prayer that we offer. And during the 5 times, the unit can vary from 4 units to a prayer to 17 units for the longest prayer. The next part is also very important. That when we are ending the prayers, we say this: all prayers and worship through words, action, and sanctity are for Allah alone. Peace be upon you, O Prophet, and the mercy of Allah and His blessings. Peace be upon us and on the righteous servants of Allah. I bear witness that there is no deity but Allah. I bear witness that Muhammad is His servant and messenger. O Allah, and please pay attention to these words, exalt Muhammad and his progeny as thou did Abraham and his progeny. Thou art the praised, the glorious. O Allah, bless Muhammad and his progeny as thou blessed Abraham and his progeny. Emphasis is on Abraham and the role of Abraham, the central role of Abraham in all 3 monotheistic religions. We all claim him to be the father of our faith. And yet we have differences. We have certain variations. And I would recommend a book to you, if you haven't already read it, by Bruce Feiler, Abraham, A Journey to the Heart of 3 Faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It's available in paperback and a good read. And he does really give you a very good picture of what it is. So this prayer now points out, 1, the unity of God, which we believe is shared by all faiths. And those of you who may have missed it, PBS ran a video that was produced by Jerry Carell. 3 Faiths, 1 God. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So wonderful program. I attended the opening of it, and it's available in DVD. Really talks about the specific commonalities and how different religious leaders from different faith traditions have described it and how it all comes together. And yet I will tell you that there is a minister, I should call him. I think he's from the Protestant tradition. And I met him during our diversity dialogue meetings at Raritan Valley Community College. And at various other events. I go to their ministerial meetings. And he has always made this point that when people say that we worship the same God as Christians do, it doesn't cut it for me. So I've not been able to convince him. But I am firmly committed to that understanding, that there is only one Creator. And I think if we close our eyes and we forget the differences in our color and our cultures and where we come from, there's only one way that we can relate to our Creator. And there's only one. So that is what I will leave with you. Now some may doubt that, because we do differ in some ritualistic ways, but the essence of the faith, I believe, in terms of the unity of God, is the same. The role of Abraham is also important in another very important tradition, and that is another pillar of Islam called Hajj. And I mention this now to save time. Hajj, as you know, is the once-a-year pilgrimage to Mecca by Muslims, and nearly 2 million people go every year. That tradition was started, and it is centered around a house of worship that Muslims believe was established by Abraham and his son. And there is a black stone, which you have read about, and I'm sure you see television pictures, that we believe angels gave to Abraham to place in that house of worship. So the origin of Islam really goes back to that time when Abraham established that. And the Quran specifically refers to Abraham as a Muslim. And Muslim simply here means someone who is submitted to the will of God. However, in whatever language you do, whatever name you may use, but that is, in essence, is what it is. The tradition associated with the Hajj, which is the sacrifice, of a goat or a lamb at the end of the Hajj is also associated with this tradition. Now, while Jews and Muslims differ as to which son it was that Prophet Abraham was prepared to sacrifice when God wanted to test his faith, we revere the tradition. And it becomes a foundation of our faith because of that, because Abraham demonstrated absolute blind faith in his God when he said, I want you to offer your son. And he was prepared to do so. And when he asked his son, are you prepared? And the son said, Father, you would find me willing. Do what your God has asked you to do. One of the other traditions that's associated with that is the story. Remember when the mother and child were banished to the desert, and the mother was looking for water. She was running between two hills. Well, that tradition is repeated every year by Muslims when they go to Hajj. All right? And during that time, the child was digging his heels through the sand, and a spring sprung up. That is known as Zamzam. That spring is running today, and pilgrims that go there bring that holy water back and keep it in their homes, give it to people. In fact, when I was in Pakistan this January, one of my relatives had gone to Hajj and had brought that water and actually offered me, when I visited, offered me and my mother and my daughter some of that water that he had brought from there. And it is considered a blessing. So those traditions are common. And they are so ingrained in every faith, but perhaps we celebrate them differently. All right? But the importance of this is that there are very, very important characters in our faiths that we need to pay attention to and follow their examples. Let me quickly mention the other two pillars. Fasting, as you know, is the month of Ramadan. I know that fasting, in fact, the Quran says the fasting was prescribed for people before you, that meaning Christians and Jews, and many still do observe those fasts, perhaps differently. But again, the value of that is the discipline that you learn, and the lesson is that you learn about the hunger that others feel when they don't have anything to eat. You do it by choice. But when people do not have a meal at their table, how do they feel? And that leads me to the fifth pillar, and that is charity. That is why Muslims are obligated every year to give 2.5% of their wealth, not income, not in yearly income, 2.5% of the wealth, to essentially cleanse that wealth and give that away in charity. And it is only given to the poor, essentially in the community. And one of the important points that I'd like to make, since the discussions have centered around understanding of faith and some of the intra-faith work that I want to come to later, for a long time, many Muslims felt that zakat money, zakat is the charity money, the 2.5% that the mosques would collect, was to be given only to Muslims. There is nothing in the Quran that says you do that. There is nothing in the tradition of the Prophet that said you do that. It was just developed over the years. But now people have realized, and now mosques in America are utilizing those funds to distribute throughout the community, in the local, because the whole purpose of that is to distribute it to the people in your own local community who need help, whether they are Muslims or not. And that's one of the things that we are now pushing, to have our members of our mosques go out and work in soup kitchens, work at homeless shelters, do other things that are, benefiting everyone in the community, rather than being isolated. This is a part of that interfaith effort that we think is critical to really have others understand who the Muslims are and what they care about. And they do care about being good citizens. And that's part of our job, is to bring the community out of that. We still have issues. Believe me, there are people who have sometimes come up to me after a talk within Muslim communities who would say, do you really believe, Dr. Chaudry, that Muslims did 9/11? Can you believe that? There are people who still believe that. And I say to them, show me the facts that deny it. If you can show me things that negate that, then I'll believe you. The point is, those were Muslims, but they were criminals. They do not represent our community, they do not represent me, and they do not speak for me. And therefore, we need to distinguish between those criminal acts and what we should be doing as Muslims. But as I said, there is a lot of educational work that has to be done. Now, I'd like to, if I may, so the 5 pillars of Islam are declaration of faith, praying 5 times a day, fasting, giving charity, and performing Hajj. So those are the ritualistic parts. But I would like to mention some of the important spiritual aspects of it. And in summary, what does Islam really mean? It's belief in one God. We believe in all the prophets that God sent. We believe in the existence of angels. We believe in the day of judgment, as you heard in the opening chapter, and as I believe is in the Lord's Prayer. And we believe in the necessity of spiritual efforts to seek knowledge. And that's why I'm here. I'm learning as well from you while I'm sharing what I know with you. Because I think it is important for me to understand where you're coming from, where some of your concerns are, and how I can help perhaps alleviate some of the misunderstandings. And maybe we can move together and build bridges of understanding so that we can build a better world with peace and justice. What I would actually call it peace through justice. Because one of the essence in practical matters for Islam is that it was established to create a just society. The Quran repeatedly says that you are sent there with an obligation to create a just society. In other words, you encourage the good and forbid the evil. And speak up against the evil. If you cannot take direct action, you must dislike it in your heart. And I'm sure you've heard that from your preachers also, in many times. So the point is that that is what we really need to do, and I think we can do it together. Now, let me take a few minutes to talk about some of the buzzwords and say a few words about each briefly, and then let me let you ask questions so that we can try to respond to some of the issues you have. What is jihad? People ask, what does jihad mean? Jihad in its essence means self-struggle. The true meaning of jihad is to struggle with oneself, to control our human urges, and to do the will of God. That is the true jihad. In fact, it is known as the greatest jihad, is to do that. Okay? Now, there are other meanings of jihad. That is, you can take up arms, but only in self-defense. That is when you're being oppressed, your property, your rights are being taken away, you can stand up and fight for them. Even then, there are rules prohibiting killing of children, killing of women, killing even trees. In fact, there's a prohibition for going after someone who is fighting you and gives up arms and seeks refuge in the house of his leader. You cannot even go into that house to pursue that person if he's given up fighting. So the Quran is very, very specific, lays down rules. That is, if they fight you, you fight. If you are oppressed, you can fight for your rights. But there is no justification for aggression or aggressive violence. There is absolutely no justification for killing innocent human beings. And therefore, anyone who justifies 9/11 or anything associated with that as a justification based on the faith is absolutely wrong. There is no basis for that. Let me say just a few words about suicide bombing. As I just said, there is no justification for, first of all, killing oneself. Okay, it's forbidden. The Quran explicitly says do not kill yourself. Chapter 4, verse 29. And by the way, suicide bombing as a concept or as a tool did not originate with Muslims. Who knows where it came from? Japanese had the bombing, yes, kamikaze bombers, but the actual suicide bombing techniques were developed by the Tamil Tigers in Sri Lanka. Tamil, T-A-M-I-L, Tamil Tigers. These are the rebels in Sri Lanka who are fighting the central government to establish their own. These are Hindu families established in largely Buddhist Sri Lanka. And they've been fighting to take control of the government. They're the ones who started the suicide bombing as a tool for political purposes. Okay? Now, other people have adopted it, but that doesn't mean that it is any more justified because somebody else invented it. It is wrong, it is forbidden, and it certainly cannot be justified. Now, in terms of the condemnation of violence and of the terrorist acts related to all of this, I won't have the time to read the whole statement, but there have been several statements. The major one has been a petition called "Not in the Name of Islam." It has been circulating on the internet, and hundreds of thousands of Muslims around the world have signed onto it. And briefly, it reads as follows. We, the undersigned Muslims, wish to state clearly that those who commit acts of terror, murder, and cruelty in the name of Islam are not only destroying innocent lives, but are also destroying the values, betraying the values of the faith they claim to represent. No injustice done to Muslims can ever justify the massacre of innocent people, and no act of terror will ever serve the cause of Islam. We repudiate and dissociate ourselves from any Muslim group or individual who commits such brutal and un-Islamic acts. We refuse to allow our faith to be held hostage by the criminal actions of a tiny minority, and believe me, it is truly a tiny minority, and has been documented by many folks. And actually, I was just given an excerpt from a book this evening that documents that there is a very, very small, tiny minority that does this, and yet the whole community gets blamed. Tiny minority acting outside the teachings of both the Quran and of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. As it states in the Quran, O you who believe, stand up firmly for justice as witness to God, even if it be against yourselves or your parents or your kin, and whether it be against rich or poor, for God can best protect both. Do not follow any passion, lest you be unjust. And if you distort or decline to do justice, verily God is well acquainted with all that you do. So it's very clear, and there are many, many statements. I have been a part of a group that published many advertising in the local newspapers in the state of New Jersey, certainly, and the New York Times, condemning violence when certain acts took place. One of the residents of New Jersey, a contractor, as you may have read, was beheaded. And at that time, I went on Fox Television, and we went on and published a condemnation, and I have a copy of that in my notes, but I won't take the time to read it. The point is that people have been condemning these things, but condemnation is not enough. But we really need to get to the point where people internally can now say, you can't do this in my name. So that brings me to the intra-faith part. In the last few minutes that I would like to take is to share with you what we certainly at the Center for Understanding Islam have been doing, and what many other communities are doing. And that is, we have visited the leadership of the mosques, and we talked to them about making sure that when their imams or any invited speakers speak of hatred of others, that they need to stand up. I usually end my presentation by asking them the question, will you stand up? And there didn't used to be too many hands going up in the past. Now there are. People are willing to stand up and say, no, you cannot do this, because people have now worked very hard to understand our own faith and what it truly means, rather than letting somebody else, some extremist, define it for us. So now that people understand it better, they can say, no, this is un-Islamic, you can't do this in my name. And that needs to happen more and more. And I'm hoping that the work that we are trying to do will bear some fruit. And one final topic that I'd like to touch on, because it comes up and it'll probably come up in questions, does the Quran advocate violence? Now you will see citations from the Holy Quran that people use in doing that. And I would simply share with you the question and answer that Dr. Muzammil Siddiqui in California prepared on this topic when he got a question from a Christian member of the audience and asked him, how can you explain the violence that we see? And so the answer to that is, first of all, to be very brief, that Quran forbids violence against innocent human beings. Where there is a reference to infidels, infidel does not refer to Christians and Jews. Christians and Jews are known as the people of the book, people who received revelation through the prophets, Moses and Jesus. And therefore, Muslims are to consider them as people of the book. People who are kafirs or infidels are those who deny the faith knowingly and hide it. But that does not justify in any way, nowhere in the Quran does it say that you can go and kill them. Where there is a reference, a specific reference, is about the events when the Prophet had migrated from Mecca to Medina, and they were establishing the Muslim community there. They were getting attacked by non-Muslim members of the Meccan community whom they had left. And this is as if in today's world they were being terrorized by the people from Mecca. So it is at that time the revelation came to the Prophet that if they fight you, you fight them. If they stop fighting, you have no justification for fighting them. But if they insist and they do not make a treaty with you, they do not make peace, then you have the right to find them and kill them. Those were the words in the Quran. Okay? But it is only in that context. It is not a general command today to go out and find Christians or Jews because you use the label infidel and kill them. There is absolutely no justification. And you can see the absurdity of it. The Quran says if Christians and Jews are people of the book, as a Muslim, you can marry women of the book. So you can marry someone who's a Christian or a Jew, but then now are you saying that somehow you have to kill her? Does it make sense? It doesn't, because it isn't true. Okay? So the point is that those instances where those commandments came, they were in a very, very specific context. And of course, you know that if you just look at the Old Testament and the New Testament, I had quotations from Deuteronomy and from Luke, where you had very, very violent language of similar type. So if you take it out of context, you then say, well, the Bible also advocates violence. All right? So the point is, we should not be taking any scripture, whether it's the Quran, the Old Testament, or the New Testament, out of context. We need to understand what comes before it, what comes after it. And to me, context really means the following. The Prophet Muhammad, who received the revelations, acted upon those revelations in his life. And he made statements about what that meant. So context to me means that I need to understand how did the prophet interpret that particular revelation and what did he do with it. That's my example. And therefore, it is very, very important for us to really gain a better understanding. And this is where we need to understand that, yes, our main guidance comes from the Holy Quran. Secondly, from the sayings of the prophet and his life example. And thirdly, and very importantly, from what we call ijtihad. That's another form of jihad. That is continuous search for meaning of the Quran and Hadith to fully understand and properly interpret that in today's context, according to our scholars who have studied all the context and have provided explanations. Understand that. That is the biggest challenge we have, and that is the kind of intellectual jihad, if you will, is what we are undertaking, to make sure that we are encouraging scholars to come forward, write about these things, educate our own community, so that we can also then help educate others. And I'll end with one example. You recently heard about the protests against the cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad. If you go to our website, we condemn that act. That's wrong. It was very insensitive. But we also condemn the violence the people who were protesting engaged in. Because I go back to the Prophet's example. There's a story about the Prophet when he would go to the mosque every day almost. A woman would throw garbage on his back. As he was passing, she would throw garbage. One day, he was going to the mosque and nothing happened. He didn't see the lady. So he asked somebody, said, what happened? Do you know anything about this lady? And they said she was sick. So he went back, on his way back, he went to the house, knocked on the door, and asked about her, how she was doing. So if that is the example of the Prophet, he didn't tell his followers to go and destroy this house because this woman was throwing garbage on him. No, he went back as a human being to ask her how she was doing, if she needed help. So I think that's the example that we need to follow. Follow what he did, what he taught us in the light of the Quran, and of course all of the writings. I know there are many other issues like role of women. I've run out of time right now. I think it's now 1 hour. I'd like to invite questions, and hopefully if you have a question on that topic, we can talk about that, or any other issue that you'd like to raise. So let's take the question. Yes, sir.
Doctor, in listening to you, you've been in this country for 39 years, you're an educated man, and I think the message that you're a peaceful individual, and most Muslims are peaceful individuals. But we in the Western world many times get this impression of the violence and the intolerance that we constantly see portrayed, and as you said, probably from a minority of Muslims, but it does come through to us. And there is this huge disconnect between what you said tonight and the actions that we see almost on a daily basis. And I think in this Western world, we have a difficult time understanding it. And if there was possibly, if there was another Muslim in this particular audience that was more akin to the aggressive side of Muslim, I think we would hear a different story. And I wonder if you could take a couple of minutes and maybe try to bring that together or resolve.
Sure, sure. First, let's understand that the teachings of Islam that I just mentioned, and I only had limited time to go into that, are not inconsistent with the ideologies pursued in the Western world, including the United States. If you go to our website, you will find an article talking about the fundamental teachings of Islam and the underlying principles of the Constitution of the United States. So first, let's begin with that base. Second, let us also remember there have been times when Muslims were in control. Take Spain. Muslims were there for 800 years. And I would highly recommend a book to you known as The Ornament of the World, written by Maria Rosa Menokal, professor from Yale. And the subtitle of that book is where Muslims, with Jews, Christians, and Muslims created a culture of tolerance in Spain. When the Inquisition took place, who took care of the Jews that had to leave Spain? Why do we have synagogues in Turkey and Iran? They went there because Muslim rulers at the time welcomed them, provided protection for them. So there has been a history of cooperation and working together. Some of the best Jewish scholars flourished in Spain. I met with a college in Manhattan, actually in Brooklyn, because they had heard me on WABC radio in New York at one time, and they called and then we wanted to talk about that. It's a Jewish girls' college, Hasidic order. And they were the ones who brought to me all the research that had been done by people during that time. So I want to dispel the one notion that there is somehow an inherent contention between what Islam teaches and what the West believes. Okay? Especially when we're talking about justice and peace. However, what you are seeing, and this has been documented, and I would recommend a study to you that a professor from Chicago had just done. And he has collected data and has done interviews with every terrorist, every known terrorist that he could identify, went to them, talked to them, documented their history. And from those interviews, his conclusion is that it is not their faith that drives those actions, it was the occupation. One word. So there are, of course, in many Muslim countries you have colonial histories. There are some residual effects of that. But I don't like to blame colonial powers. But even if I look at Pakistan, for example, in the village that I grew up, I shared this at dinner. I grew up in a village of about 50 families. I was the only one who finished high school. First one from my family to finish high school and then go on and be where I am today. Why didn't the British create schools in those villages? When they took all the wealth from India. Why did they not do that? So my question is, this is what people are saying to you. Coming back, they're saying, you've exploited the wealth that was there, and now people are left out. It is not to say that Muslims don't have a responsibility themselves to stand up and fill this void. And I recognize the biggest void is really education. Ultimately, it comes down to education, education, education. And that needs to be done more and more, and that's where our emphasis needs to be. But let me just go back to your stated question. Yes, you see these acts of violence because these people, and I'm not saying that they are justified in doing that, because I said, when I make these statements about suicide bombers, on the radio, people sometimes call in and say, well, how can I believe you because I see this happening? Well, my point is, if there are oppressions taking place, if there is occupation of a territory that people do not want to be occupied, they have the right to stand up and fight it. So I would ask you to sort of go behind the scene a little bit and understand, not rationalize, but understand the circumstances under which these things are happening. So my question basically is, yes, now we're seeing this violence. How come it didn't happen before? How come it didn't happen before World War II? There were no Muslims fighting the West in that way. So I think we have to be realistic. And this is one of the things that's amazing to me when I look at some of the television shows, that fully knowing the facts. The other day, there was a story about a Muslim television station that has been established in Buffalo, New York. It's called Bridges Television. Invited the FBI to hold an open town hall meeting with Muslim community. And it was a great event in the sense that they began to talk to each other, because we need to work with the law enforcement communities. We're the first ones who would say, why do we want to see anyone who advocates or is planning any kind of a terrorist activity against my country? Why would I want to see them in my community? We'll be the first one to take them out or point them out. And we should be. And therefore, when that meeting was held, do you know what CNN, or no, was it, I think, a CNBC program, The Situation Room? The commentator or the host of that program was ridiculing and was questioning the FBI director, why did you go have a meeting with the Muslims? If it was a meeting to understand better and build a relationship, it's a positive step. Rather than applauding it, and rather than having another Muslim also present and in that interview, he had the FBI director on the defensive. To me, that's the problem. And I think if you want to minimize the misinformation that's being distributed, I think you can help with your own local media, with your local press, and holding them accountable. Other questions? Shall I take some written questions? Yeah. Okay. All right. Since I didn't cover the women, so let me touch on that topic first. Do women have a specific role in the life of Islam? In the mosques, right? Yes. Let me just say first of all that women in pre-Islamic Arabia were so badly treated that baby girls, newborn baby girls, were buried alive. Because in the nomadic traditions, they wanted male children who could hunt and who could do whatever was necessary. It was a dishonor. It was considered to be a dishonor. Islam stopped that. Prophet Muhammad worked hard to stop that practice. And Islam, 1427 years ago, in the Quran, explicitly gave rights to women that Western women just got recently, and after a struggle. All right? Secondly, the role of women in the faith itself is equal to men. There is no distinction. In fact, the Quran specifically talks about there's no difference between the soul of a man and the soul of a woman. God treats them equally. God holds them accountable equally for dressing modestly, for example, or doing other things, but they each have a role. In particular, when the role of the mother comes in, the Quran explicitly tells us, heaven lies at the feet of your mother. That means respect your parents. Respect your mother, respect your mother, respect your mother. The Prophet was asked many times. A fourth time he said, respect your father. So the point of it was that the mother is an important pillar of the family, and family is an important pillar of the community. Therefore, it's very, very important. Now, in the mosque, your specific question about the role of the women in Islam, in the mosque, it varies from mosque to mosque. And I'm sad to say that in some cases, women are still kept in the back. I'll give you one example where Dr. Crane, who's one of my colleagues, as the co-founder of the Islamic Center for Understanding Islam, and I were speaking at Jersey City, in a mosque in Jersey City. And we had scheduled a taping of that interview for a radio broadcast. And I wanted young girls in that mosque to sit with the experts who were coming in from the radio station to learn how to do it. That was our goal. When we got there, I see the lady who had come with the equipment from the radio station sitting in a corner with other women behind a curtain. And the man who came with her was sitting up front where the imam was, where we were going to speak. So as soon as I walked in, I asked the leader, I said, where is the lady who I asked to come to train the women? She's with the women. So I was taken aback. So I said to him, I need her to come out in the front, and I need you to bring at least 2 other women to sit out in front with her and watch how she does the recording. They didn't remove the curtain from the rest of them, but he brought 2 young ladies, his daughter, okay, and another lady, and that woman out in the front. Okay? So unfortunately, these are cultural issues. This is the Pakistani community. Islam didn't teach that. In the first 50 years of Islam, actually first 100 years of Islam, there are nearly 2,000 judges that served in those roles. The head of what we now call compliance on weight measurements. Remember, one of the rules in the Quran was don't shortchange on measure. In other words, don't shortchange on weight. If somebody buys something from you for $1, you give them $1 worth of, don't shortchange. And this was observed. And the person who was in charge of that was a woman. Now, why aren't more women involved in leadership positions? Again, goes back to culture. I can tell you in the mosque that I was president for 10 years at the American Islamic Academy, the Islamic Center in Boonton, New Jersey. A woman runs the show. In the Islamic Center, on the board, the Center for Understanding Islam, we have 3 women that serve on the board as equal partners to the extent that they can take the role, if they have the time to do things, and so forth. And my dream would be to establish a mosque there where the board is dominated by women. But it doesn't happen everywhere. Women are now taking more and more roles in the board of trustees. They are taking roles as heads of committees, but we have a long way to go. But as I said, this is cultural. We are seeing more American women, people who are growing up here, our children, who are now growing up and saying, look, I want to run this program, and I'm capable of doing that. And they are doing it. So it is something that we need to work on. It'll take a long time. But it is definitely an issue. But again, please don't blame that on Islam. Islam never forbade women from playing those roles. And let me just end that comment on women. How many of you recognize that Pakistan elected a woman prime minister twice? Bangladesh has a woman prime minister. Indonesia. India, which has a very large Muslim population, second largest probably, supported an Indian, Indira Gandhi as a prime minister. Turkey. So there are many, many examples where women have come up. But sometimes we do revert back. And this is where, as I said, the education is the key. If you don't have people who are educated and capable and willing to stand up for their own rights, that is when you lose the power. And that is why we need women to be educated and speak for themselves. Yes, sir.
Are there any descendants of Muhammad? And where is the leadership of Islam in the world, or / America, but I think more the world?
First of all, there is nothing hereditary in Islam. In fact, if you remember, there is no hierarchy in Islam. We do not have a pope. We do not have a central authority that dictates what you can do or what you can't do. We do have schools that interpret the Quran and the Hadith and guide us. And if me as an individual, I have to make the choice and learn what it is and interpret that in my own way and use it. Every local mosque elects its own board. They hire their own imam that serves their needs. Nobody appoints them. And nobody centrally pays them.
Don't you think perhaps that's leading to chaos?
No, I don't believe so. Because, see, the problem is the responsibility is on every individual to learn to do that. But let me just show you one example of what can happen with that kind of a concern. Why do you think we have a Sunni and a Shia sect? Because as the Prophet was approaching the end of his life and after he passed away, there was a dispute. There were people known as the partisans of Ali, known as Shia, who believed because he was the cousin of the Prophet, they were from the same family, he should be the next caliph, the first caliph, right after the Prophet died. Yet the rule in Islam is that you rise to leadership based on consensus. People who think of you as you emerge as a leader because people believe in you, people trust you, and therefore you become a leader. You don't become a leader by appointment or by heredity. And therefore, another companion of the Prophet, Abu Bakr Siddiq, became the first caliph. Ali became the fourth one in the end. But in the meantime, the tussle started, but this became a political battle. And that was actually a good question, because that allows me to say that Shia-Sunni split is not based on faith, not based on the essentials of the faith. It is strictly a political division that has occurred, and approximately 12 to 15% of the Muslims around the world would be considered Shia. The rest of them would be majority Sunni. And then within the Sunni, of course, we have tremendous variety, just like you have denominations, different shades of conservatism, some very, very extreme, specifically the Wahhabis in particular, who are the source of some of the problems with extremism, where there is a literal translation, literal interpretation of the Quran rather than a proper understanding of the scripture. Let me take another written question here. Should Islam do more to repudiate violence in the name of Islam? We absolutely should, and that's what I've been doing. And I think if you can help us get the word into everybody's hands, I would appreciate it. And by the way, if you doubt that enough hasn't been done, I would go to cair-net.org, cair-net.org. And there is a page, just click on a list of condemnations, and you get about 39 to 40 pages of statements that were issued by different members of the community. So it has been done, but how do we get it out to everybody? We don't have an opportunity like this, everybody, to meet people. I wish we did. I wish we had a radio station. In fact, that is one of the things that's being developed, especially with the internet. Hopefully there'll be more opportunity for people to get the word out. This television program that is being developed is helping. Okay? So let me go on to the next one. Okay, so this one is done. An Afghan citizen who converted from Muslim faith to Christianity. Well, his case, as you know, was dismissed. I can tell you, I grew up in Pakistan. There are flourishing churches, there are schools, there are colleges. The president of Pakistan went to a school that was run by an order of the Jesuits, FCC College, Foreman's Christian College. All right? There are the best private schools in Lahore are run by missionaries. And they flourish. Everybody sends their kids there. So I think we have to sort of understand the actual reality on the ground rather than simply take what the press writes here, because they have never been there. They don't know how it's being practiced. You said at the outset that our duty as moderate break our faith, besides speaking to sympathetic primary non-Muslim audiences like the one, how else are you doing this? Teaching in some Muslim schools. How do we join in your efforts? Excellent. Thank you for the offer. Please let us talk. Yes, we do go to schools. Actually, we have a major initiative in the Center for Understanding Islam, and a woman is heading it, by the way. 3 women run that. All right? Preparing resources for teachers. If you go to our website, actually it's being updated right now, but I have the draft of the manual that we gave to 2 sets of school teachers in Bridgewater Raritan Township. And believe me, we didn't ask for that. We wanted to get it to every school. A teacher, a Jewish teacher of social studies in the Bridgewater Middle School called because she looked for the Center for Understanding Islam on the website and asked us if we would come and talk to the teachers. So we've given 2 workshops to them. They have been to the mosques. We have taken Jewish children now 3 years in a row to our mosque so that they meet with young Muslims of their own age. And there are many, many other initiatives that are taking place. And yes, if you can help us in this area, I'll be glad to put you in touch with Muslims that I have found out who are in the area who will be glad to work with you. Does the Quran speak of killing who leave, give up Muslim? No, the Quran does not talk about that at all. And in fact, if I could give you a quotation, if I could quickly find it, the Quran specifically says, let me just, if I may take a minute, that there is no compulsion in religion. And it's repeated. There is no compulsion in religion. If a Muslim can marry a Christian or a Jew and cannot even talk about his faith in front of her with the idea that he may influence or appear to be influencing. So Quran does not absolutely require that. Secondly, there is a very important passage in the Quran, and I will paraphrase it, that says that those who believe in one God, in the day of judgment, and do good deeds will have their reward with their Lord, and they shall have nothing to fear on the day of judgment. So 3 things: belief in one God, belief in the day of judgment, accountability, and then doing good deeds, being a good human being. And how you get that guidance as to what does it mean to be good? You got to follow your own tradition. Secondly, the Quran also says, if I may, that if God had wanted, he could have made all mankind as one community. But that was not his design. That there are different paths to God. All right? So, I mean, I could go on, but there is a lot more. So the Quran certainly does not prohibit it. Yes, sir?
Dr. Chaudry, you mentioned the people of the book. What about the millions of others across the world? How does Islam view them?
Well, Islam basically says that that it is up to God, because since we don't know what is in their heart. I spoke to a Hindu recently, actually about a year ago. We were in an Interfaith dialogue in Princeton. And we were talking, and because we've been doing this for a long time. And he sat down with me and he said, when we talk about idols that they use for worship and so forth, because in the Muslim communities, it is generally understood that that means that they consider them as gods, as they did in Mecca, right? I mean, there was a time when they had idols, and they were broken up. But he said to me that no, in essence, we believe in one God, one Creator. These are different manifestations of how we offer our services, how we worship. In the Quran, I mean, in the Muslim tradition, there are 99 different attributes of God, in addition to Allah. 99 names of Allah, of God. So there are different ways to look at the tradition. So I think the answer to your question is that it is up to each individual, and also Quran clearly says, this revelation to the Prophet. Your job is done when you have conveyed the revelation that you received. It is up to us for people to believe. Up to us meaning God. It is up to God to guide people to the right path and to the belief that they are comfortable with, and that will bring them to God. So our job is to explain, and that is why it's a duty for every Muslim to learn as much as possible, as in much depth as possible, to understand our faith and then follow it. But it is not definitely for us to compel anyone to do that. And therefore, there is no proselytization in any of the work that we do. And by the way, we also do not practice what we call exclusivism. There are some Muslims who have said these kind of things, that only if you believe in Islam, you go to heaven. Well, people at the Center for Understanding Islam do not feel that we have an exclusive agency to issue passports to heaven. If you do, and if somebody does, all the power to them. Because we believe God is the best judge, and it is up to him how his creation relates to him. There's a lady in the back who has the 2 of them, but let me on the back, please. Yes, ma'am.
2 comments and questions.
Yes.
First of all, I know we all came tonight because the topic was understanding Islam, but I think that what we all really want to understand is how people have kidnapped the religion and the terrorists have twisted things in the name of Islam. And we can respect people of different faiths without understanding their faiths. I think the big question is, we really want to understand how this happened. And secondly, I think that maybe more of the education would benefit people within the religion, almost like the Catholic Church with the priest of this. because I think that there needs to be a united front of what Islam is, and educate other Muslims, not audiences like this necessarily.
I agree with you. I think we said that the purpose of our work is really interfaith and intra-faith, and that is better education for ourselves and others within the Muslim community, and that's what I addressed earlier, that we are going out to the mosques and talking about getting more mosques to join us in this effort.
Maybe
so that,
not just in the United States.
but in order to understand, but I think it should also happen in Pakistan, countries like Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. But I have no way of being able to do that because I don't have the means. However, I do hope that there will be people who can provide that kind of support and do that. But the issue, that's why I'm saying basic education in those countries. If you raise the level of literacy, make people independent thinkers, they themselves will criticize and will rise up. And that's how changes have taken place. And I think this study that done by this professor at Chicago is very telling. That's basically telling you that it is not the faith that causes them to commit those acts of violence. It is their grievances, whatever they perceive the grievances to be. But let me also share this with you. Just a few days ago, Osama bin Laden issued another videotape claiming that he wanted to protect the Hamas government, right? He didn't want the Israelis to deny, the US to deny funds to the Palestinians, to the Hamas government, right? What did the Hamas government say? Here is a statement from the Hamas government. I just want to get to the right part of it quickly so that we don't. Okay, in his first message in 3 months, bin Laden said in an audio tape that West's decision to cut off funds for the Palestinians because their Hamas leaders refused to recognize Israel proved that the United States was fighting a Zionist crusader war against Islam, right? That was the statement that he made. In response, Hamas spokesman Sami Abu Zuhri said the ideology of Hamas is totally different from the ideology of Sheikh bin Laden. We have nothing to do with him. They are distancing themselves from him. So there are people who are obviously for their own, so they can sustain their evil designs, they're trying to recruit more people toward their cause as if they're helping them. But people don't want their help because they know that it is not a help. So similarly, as I read the other petition, Muslims in general have said, if you go to our website, there's a memo from a professor that I put up there to bin Laden. Go to hell. You cannot speak for us. So I think, yes, there is work to be done. I agree with you. And I just wish we had about 100,000 of people like me who can go and do this, and we had the funds to undertake things. I wish I could open schools in Pakistan, in every village, where every kid learns to read, every girl learns to read and understand the Quran. Once they do, they would not listen to their imams. They would attack, they would challenge their imams and say you're wrong. So they will be forced to then learn what the true Islam is. So I think that the key really is there. It's a much bigger job than I can handle alone, but it is something that I agree that needs to be done. I'm sorry we have other questions, but it looks like we're running out of time. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.